The summer heat pressed down on the Arizona desert like a heavy blanket. Raymond Miller wiped sweat from his weathered brow as he guided his pickup truck along the dusty road that bordered the Apache reservation. At 73, Raymond had spent most of his life on his cattle ranch, which shared its eastern boundary with tribal lands. The border had always been more than just a property line. It was a divide between worlds that rarely intersected. Raymond slowed as he approached the old trading post that served as an unofficial meeting point between the reservation and the surrounding communities. The wooden structure had stood for nearly a century, its porch sagging slightly under the weight of history. He parked and reached for a brown paper package on the passenger seat. Inside the trading post, the air was cooler. A few locals browsed shelves stocked with essentials and tourist trinkets. Raymond nodded at Bill, the owner, before his attention settled on a young Apache girl sitting quietly in the corner. She couldn't have been more than 12, with long black hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Raymond had seen her several times over the past months, always alone, always watching. "She comes in most afternoons," Bill said, following Raymond's gaze. "Name's Nina. Lives with her grandmother on the reservation. Smart kid, but doesn't say much." Raymond nodded. Something about the girl reminded him of his late wife, Sarah, who'd had that same observant stillness. Maybe it was that memory that had prompted him to stop at the general store in town last week and purchase the doll that now sat wrapped in brown paper under his arm. "You need anything today, Ray?" Bill asked. "Just some coffee beans," Raymond replied, his eyes still on the girl. After paying for his purchase, he hesitated, then walked over to where Nina sat. "Hello there," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm Raymond Miller. I ranch over on the west side." The girl looked up, her expression guarded but curious. "I noticed you here a few times," Raymond continued. "I had a granddaughter about your age. She moved away with her parents years ago. California." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, I saw this and thought you might like it." He extended the package toward her. Nina stared at the offering, making no move to take it. "It's just a doll," Raymond explained. "Nothing fancy. My wife used to collect them." After a long moment, the girl reached out and took the package. She didn't open it, just held it in her lap, her eyes now fixed on Raymond with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Well, you have a good day now," he said, nodding awkwardly before turning to leave. Outside, Raymond sat in his truck longer than necessary, wondering what had possessed him to buy a gift for a stranger's child. Sarah would have understood. She'd always said he had a heart too big for his own good, though few others would have described the taciturn rancher that way. On the reservation, Nina walked the 3 miles to her grandmother's small house, the unopened package tucked under her arm. The path wound through scrubby vegetation and around rocky outcroppings, a landscape both harsh and beautiful to those who knew how to see it. Her grandmother, Edsela, was grinding corn when Nina entered. At 67, Edsela stood straight and strong, her hands calloused from a lifetime of work, her face lined with experiences both bitter and sweet. "What is that?" she asked in Apache, nodding toward the package. "A gift," Nina replied in the same language, from the white rancher with the sad eyes. Edsela's hand stilled. "Raymond Miller," she said, switching to English. The name carried weight in her voice. Nina looked up, surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him," Edsela said carefully. "What did he give you?" Nina unwrapped the package to reveal a porcelain doll with pale skin, blonde curls, and blue eyes that opened and closed. It wore a frilly pink dress with white lace trim and tiny leather shoes. Edsela studied the doll, then her granddaughter's face. "What do you think of this gift?" Nina ran her fingers over the doll's smooth face, its fixed smile, its hair that felt nothing like her own. "It is very pretty," she said slowly, "but it is not me." Edsela nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then what will you do with it?" Nina looked up at her grandmother, a decision forming. "I will learn from it," she said, "and then I will make something true." For 3 days, the doll sat on the small shelf above Nina's sleeping mat. Each morning and evening, she would study it carefully, her fingers tracing its contours, examining the craftsmanship of its joints, the painting of its features, the stitching of its clothes. She sketched it in a tattered notebook, noting details that might be useful. The doll watched her with its glass blue eyes, its permanent smile at odds with the solemnity of Nina's inspection. On the fourth day, as dawn broke over the reservation, Nina took the doll down and wrapped it in a cloth. She placed it in her backpack alongside her notebook and a small hunting knife that had belonged to her father. "I am going to the canyon," she told her grandmother, who was making tea over the small stove. Edsela looked up, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Will you be back for dinner?" "Yes," Nina promised. "I need to think." The older woman nodded. Among their people, seeking solitude for reflection was respected, even in one so young. "Take water," was all she said. Nina filled a canteen and set out. The morning was still cool, the desert awakening around her. She followed a narrow trail that wound through the landscape, eventually leading to a small canyon where a trickle of water persisted even in the dry season. It was a place Nina had come to think since she was small, a natural sanctuary where the rock walls held ancient stories in their layers. At the bottom of the canyon, near the small pool formed by the stream, Nina cleared a patch of ground and arranged a circle of stones. She gathered dry brush and small branches, building a careful pile. From her pocket, she took a box of matches, practical tools that bridged old ways and new. Nina unwrapped the doll and placed it beside her. "You are beautiful," she said to it in English. "But you are not of this place. You do not know the stories of these rocks or the language of the wind here." She switched to Apache. "I cannot be you, and you cannot be me." With deliberate movements, Nina removed the doll's clothes, folding them neatly. She studied the doll one last time, committing its proportions to memory. Then she placed it atop the brush pile and struck a match. The fire caught quickly, the dry kindling eager for the flame. Nina watched as the heat reached the doll, its paint bubbling first, then the porcelain cracking with a sound like tiny thunder. The synthetic hair curled and blackened, releasing an acrid smell that mixed with the sweet smoke of burning desert wood. As the doll burned, Nina opened her notebook and continued her sketches, now adding designs that incorporated elements of Apache tradition, patterns her grandmother had taught her, symbols that told the story of their people and this land. The fire reflected in her dark eyes, not as destruction but as transformation. When the flames died down, Nina carefully gathered the ashes, placing them in a small leather pouch. She scattered the remaining embers and poured water over the site, ensuring no fire would spread in the dry canyon. Back home, Edsela was grinding herbs when Nina returned. The older woman glanced at her granddaughter's empty hands and the pouch at her belt, but asked no questions. "Raymond Miller came looking for you," she said instead. "He wanted to know if you liked the doll." Nina stilled. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were studying it carefully." Edsela's hands continued their rhythmic work. He seemed pleased. He said his granddaughter never took such care with her toys. Nina sat beside her grandmother. "Did you know his family before?" Edsela was quiet for a long moment. "The Millers have ranched that land for 4 generations, she finally said. "Raymond's grandfather took it when our people were being forced onto the reservation. His father expanded it during the drought of the 1950s, when many of our people sold what little they had left to feed their children." "And Raymond?" Nina asked. "Raymond," Edsela sighed. "Raymond is complicated. He has lived alone since his wife died 15 years ago. He employs several men from the reservation, pays them fairly. He fought the mining company that wanted to dig up the northern hills." She looked at her granddaughter. "People are not always one thing or another, Nina. They are like the canyon, many layers, formed over time." Nina nodded, understanding more than her grandmother might have expected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the doll's tiny leather shoes, the only parts she had removed before the burning. "I will need bone," she said, "for carving." Edsela's eyes crinkled at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. "Your grandfather's old tools are in the chest, and there are deer bones drying behind the house." Dawn had not yet broken when Nina began her work. By the light of a small oil lamp, she laid out her grandfather's carving tools on a deerskin mat, small knives with curved blades, files of different sizes, polishing stones worn smooth from years of use. Beside them, she placed the deer bones she had selected, cleaned, and boiled the evening before. The largest was a femur, already bleached white by the sun, perfect for the body and head of what she envisioned. Smaller bones would form the limbs. Nina worked with focused intensity, her small hands steady and precise as she began to shape the main piece. Outside, the reservation slowly came to life as the sun rose over the eastern mountains. Dogs barked in the distance. A truck engine sputtered to life. But inside the small house, Nina existed in a world of concentration, the soft scraping of tools against bone the only sound. Adsila moved quietly around her, preparing breakfast, then leaving for her job at the reservation clinic, where she worked as a traditional healer alongside the Western-trained doctors. She placed a plate of food near Nina, but didn't interrupt her work. The morning stretched into afternoon. Nina paused only briefly to eat and drink, her eyes never leaving her creation for long. With each cut and scrape, the bone began to take shape, not as an imitation of the porcelain doll, but as something new yet connected to it. The face emerged first, not the round-cheeked visage of the store-bought toy, but a face with the high cheekbones and straight nose of Nina's people. The eyes were not indentations for glass inserts, but carved directly into the bone, almond-shaped and watchful. The mouth was small, not fixed in an eternal smile, but set in a solemn line that hinted at hidden wisdom. Nina worked through the pain when her fingers cramped, through the frustration when a cut didn't follow her design. By late afternoon, the basic form was complete. A female figure about 7 inches tall, its proportions those of a young woman rather than the exaggerated childishness of the porcelain doll. As the day's heat began to subside, Nina heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. She continued her work, knowing her grandmother wasn't due back for hours. The truck engine shut off. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps crossed the hard-packed earth to their door. A knock came, hesitant. "Nina, Mrs. Talahongva? It's Raymond Miller." Nina looked up from her work, but didn't move to open the door. After a moment, it opened anyway. Locks were rare on the reservation, trust and respect generally enough to maintain boundaries. Raymond stood awkwardly in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. His eyes found Nina, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by bone shavings, tools in her hands. Your grandmother said I might find you here," he said. "I wanted to see if you liked the doll." Nina met his gaze steadily. "I burned it," she said, her voice clear despite her limited use of English. Raymond blinked, surprise and something like hurt crossing his weathered face. "You burned it," he repeated. Nina nodded. She held up the partially completed bone carving. "I am making a new one." Raymond stepped closer, squinting to see her work. Understanding slowly replaced confusion in his eyes. "You're carving a doll from bone?" "Yes." Nina turned the figure to show him the details. "It will be better. It will be true." Raymond removed his glasses, wiped them on his shirt, and replaced them. He studied the carving with newfound respect. "You're an artist," he said softly. Nina didn't respond to this. She wasn't sure what the English word meant, but she understood his tone. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair near the door. "I will show you." Raymond hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair. It creaked slightly under his weight. He watched as Nina continued to work, her small hands moving with surprising strength and precision as she refined the features of the face. "My wife used to do beadwork," Raymond said after a while. "Had the steadiest hands I've ever seen. Could work for hours without stopping, just like you're doing." Nina glanced up briefly. "Was she Apache?" Raymond shook his head. "No. She was from Oklahoma originally. Cherokee, on her mother's side. Never talked about it much." He paused. "I don't think anyone ever asked her, to be honest." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Nina continued her carving, and Raymond watched, occasionally offering a comment or question that Nina would answer with a word or two. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, a different kind of understanding began to form between them, tentative and fragile, but real. Over the next 2 weeks, Raymond's truck became a familiar sight outside Nina and Adzila's home. He would arrive in the late afternoon, after his ranch work was done, bringing small offerings, a smooth piece of turquoise he'd found years ago, a leather working kit that had belonged to his wife, a book of Native American art that had gathered dust on his shelf. Nina accepted these gifts with solemn nods, sometimes incorporating them into her work. The turquoise became eyes for the bone doll. The leather tools helped her craft a small dress from a scrap of deer hide. All the while, Raymond sat in the chair by the door, watching and talking in his slow, measured way. "My grandfather claimed this land in 1889, he said one afternoon as Nina carefully jointed the doll's arms. Back then, they called it opening territory for settlement. Now we know better what to call it." Nina looked up. "What? Theft," Raymond said simply. "They stole it." Nina's hand stilled. She studied the old rancher's face, seeing the guilt that lined it alongside years of sun and wind. "The past is heavy," she said in Apache, then switched to English. "But we carry it together now." Raymond nodded, though he couldn't have understood her first words. Something in her tone conveyed the meaning well enough. On the 10th day, Atsila joined them. She had been observing from a distance, letting the strange friendship develop without interference. But curiosity and concern finally brought her into the circle. "Your family has the Rockingham Ranch for a long time," she said to Raymond, her English precise despite her accent. "4 generations." Raymond nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And before that?" Atsila's eyes were sharp. "Before that, it wasn't ours to have," Raymond admitted. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." Atsila nodded, satisfied with his answer for now. She moved to the small kitchen area and began preparing dinner, the rhythmic sound of her knife on the cutting board joining the scrape of Nina's tools on bone. "Will you stay to eat?" she asked without turning. Raymond looked surprised at the invitation. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It is stew," Atsila said, as if that settled the matter. And so Raymond Miller, whose ancestors had claimed Apache land as their own, shared a meal at the table of Atsila Talahonga, whose ancestors had walked that same land for countless generations before. They ate mostly in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Nina watched them both, understanding that something significant was happening, even if she couldn't fully name it. After dinner, Raymond helped wash the dishes, his large hands careful with Atsila's mismatched plates. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Nina. "I have something at the ranch," he said, "something that might belong here instead. Would you and your grandmother consider coming to see it?" Nina looked to Atsila, who considered the invitation before nodding once. "Tomorrow," Raymond said. "I'll come get you after lunch." The next day, Raymond arrived in his truck, freshly washed for the occasion. The drive to his ranch took 20 minutes, the landscape gradually changing from the more arid reservation land to greener pastures, where black Angus cattle grazed in the distance. The ranch house was larger than Nina had imagined, a sprawling single-story structure of wood and stone. Raymond parked in front and led them through a house that spoke of solitude. Rooms too large for one person, spaces designed for a family long gone. In what had once been a dining room, Raymond stopped before a glass cabinet. Inside were dozens of artifacts, stone tools, arrowheads, fragments of pottery, even a cradleboard. "My grandfather collected these," Raymond explained, his voice tight. "Found them when digging fence posts or clearing land. My father added to the collection. So did I when I was younger." He turned to face them. "I didn't understand then that these weren't just interesting objects. They're pieces of your history." Atsila stepped forward, her face a careful mask as she examined the items. "Some of these are very old," she said, "from before the reservation time." "I'd like to return them," Raymond said. "All of them. They should be with your people, not sitting in my cabinet." Atsila's composure broke slightly, surprise flickering across her features. "The tribal museum would be a good place," she said after a moment. "They preserve our history there." Nina moved closer to the cabinet, her eyes drawn to a small figure near the back, a carving made from antler, worn smooth by time, depicting a woman with a child on her back. It wasn't unlike what she herself was creating, this connection across time rendered in bone. "Some things find their way home," she said softly. Raymond nodded, understanding. Yes, he said. Sometimes they just need a little help getting there. The tribal museum occupied a modest building near the center of the reservation. Its exterior was unassuming, but inside, the space was carefully designed to tell the story of the Apache people, their traditions, their struggles, their endurance. Glass cases displayed artifacts similar to those from Raymond's collection, but here they were arranged with purpose, each item labeled with information about its use and significance. Raymond, Nina, and Edsela stood in the museum director's office, surrounded by cardboard boxes containing the Miller family's collection. Dr. Joseph Descheny, a middle-aged Apache man with glasses and a quiet authority, inspected each item carefully. "This is quite significant," he said, holding up a clay pot with geometric designs that had remained remarkably intact. Early 19th century, at least. And this? He lifted a stone tool with reverence. This is much older, possibly pre-colonial. Raymond shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry they were taken from their proper places." Dr. Descheny looked up, his expression softening. "Mr. Miller, while the circumstances of collection were problematic, the fact that these items were preserved at all is something of a blessing. Many similar artifacts were destroyed or lost forever." "Still," Raymond insisted, "they belong here, with your people." "Yes," Dr. Descheny agreed. "They do, and we're grateful for their return." He began filling out paperwork, documenting each item and its condition. "We'll create a special exhibition," he explained. "The repatriation of cultural heritage is an important story to tell." Nina, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Will you tell about Raymond too?" The adults turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean, Nina?" Dr. Descheny asked. "People should know that he brought them back," she said firmly, "that he understood they needed to come home." Dr. Descheny considered this, then nodded. "Yes, I think that's an important part of the story too. Acknowledgement and reconciliation." As they left the museum, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the reservation. Raymond walked more slowly than usual, as if the return of the artifacts had both lightened and aged him simultaneously. "Would you like to see my ranch?" he asked suddenly. "The real ranch, I mean, not just a house." Edsela and Nina exchanged glances. After a moment, Edsela nodded. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." They drove further into Raymond's property than Nina had seen before, past green pastures and along dirt roads that wound through hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. Eventually, they came to a ridge overlooking a valley where a creek cut through the landscape, creating a ribbon of lush vegetation. "This is my favorite spot," Raymond said as they got out of the truck. "My wife and I used to picnic here." He pointed to the east. "The reservation boundary is about 2 miles that way. This whole valley used to be Apache land." "It still remembers," Edsela said softly. Raymond turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This land, I have no children to leave it to. My granddaughter never comes to visit anymore. When I'm gone, it'll probably be sold to developers or a corporate farm." He took a deep breath. "But maybe there's another way." Edsela's eyes widened slightly as she understood his implication. "That would be complicated." "Most worthwhile things are," Raymond replied. "I've already called a lawyer in town. There are ways to create land trusts to ensure it's protected and managed according to certain principles." He looked out over the valley again. "I can't undo what my ancestors did, but maybe I can help shape what happens next." Nina, who had been listening intently, reached into her pocket and pulled out the bone doll she had completed the day before. Its small face gazed up with carved eyes inlaid with turquoise. The deer-hide dress was adorned with tiny beads in a traditional Apache pattern. Its limbs were jointed with sinew, allowing it to sit or stand. "For you," she said, holding it out to Raymond. The old rancher took it with trembling hands, turning it carefully to examine the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "But why give it to me? You worked so hard on it." "Because," Nina said simply, "you gave me something first. Not the other doll. Something else." Raymond looked at her questioningly. "You showed me that people can change," Nina explained. "That the past doesn't have to be the future." as the sun began to set, casting the valley in gold and shadow. The three of them stood together on the ridge, an old white rancher, an Apache elder, and a young girl who carried the future in her hands, connected by a complex history and the tentative hope of reconciliation. The bone doll rested in Raymond's weathered palm, a symbol of something broken and remade into something new. Not perfect, still bearing the scars of its transformation, but beautiful in its truth.